The following program is intended for mature audiences and contains scenes of graphic violence, coarse language, drug and alcohol references, sexual references, and nudity. Viewer discretion is advised. Actually, it doesn't, but doesn't it get you all hyped to watch it more? Hey all, welcome to Gamesplain, where we walk through an entire game story, explain the plot and ending, and break down additional details about the game. In this episode, we'll be delving into Wolfenstein: The New Order, the first in the series that concentrates on a legitimately engaging story, and it served to kick off a new era in the Wolfenstein franchise. It follows our perennial hero, BJ Blazkowicz, as he navigates a world where, despite all his previous best efforts, the Nazis actually won the Second World War. Make sure you stick around to the end, where I reveal some lesser-known details about the Wolfenstein franchise and tell you about where the story goes from here. If you're new to the channel, click subscribe and notify to find your way back. So, Achtung! Ich bin so aufgeregt. Let's get Gamesplaining. Released in 2014, this is the first game developed by Machine Games when the legendary id Software sold the rights to the Wolfenstein franchise to Bethesda, which under recent news is now part of Microsoft. Machine Games' entire portfolio of games consists pretty much of Wolfenstein games, although under a recent deal, they'll be developing a new game based on the Indiana Jones franchise. Interestingly, the classic Indiana Jones series also heavily features Nazis, which leads me to believe that these guys just really love beating up on Nazis. This game is the 7th main entry in the Wolfenstein franchise, but the 9th overall Wolfenstein game, and is a soft reboot of the franchise and is a semi-sequel to 2009's self-titled Wolfenstein. It generally received positive reviews and award nominations at release, with praise mainly directed at the combat and the game's narrative. IGN gave the game a 7.8 and the Metacritic score is sitting around 79. As we'll cover the story here, the developers' goal with this game was to build a genuinely interesting ensemble cast to interact with beyond just that, hey, this is the guy that we play. This is made apparent as Blazkowicz explains his inner thoughts through short monologues, revealing that he's left traumatized by his experiences. The story being the main focus, as this game has no multiplayer component as in previous games. As a note, the game provides some moral choices that slightly alter the game, including the characters that accompany you and some of the weapons you can use. I'll be covering one specific branch of the story that I found to be the most interesting. Oh yes, and warning, major spoilers ahead, and I don't mind it, but the story does tend to get ridiculous, although I think it's a little tongue-in-cheek. Anyhow, wunderbar! So let's jump right in. Somebody wake up Hicks. Our story opens at the dawn of July 16th, 1946, with our hero, Captain William B.J. Blazkowicz, in a fitful sleep. In a gruff voice that would put Rorschach to shame, he dreams about an idyllic family cookout before lamenting that it's not a life that's meant for him. He wakes in the fuselage of a warplane to the prompting of his extremely Scottish pilot, Fergus Reed. This guy is like the most Scottish guy you've ever seen.
I need to go to the piss. A shite!
Well, besides this guy. Or this guy. And even this guy. Oh, okay, he's like the 10th most Scottish guy you've ever seen.
A shite!
Alongside an armada of warplanes, the scope reminiscent of the bombing runs on D-Day, they are assaulting the stronghold and weapons research facility of the Nazi Obergruppenführer, or General Wilhelm Deathshead Strauss, who serves as the main antagonist in previous games. Things don't take long to go south, with anti-aircraft fire shredding Allied planes, with one slamming portside, setting the engine ablaze. BJ closes off the fuel line and jettisons extra cargo to avoid going down. BJ mans the frontal gun as the complement of German fighters swoop in from all directions. During the dogfight, an enemy fighter slams right into the plane's front, destroying the forward gun and almost killing BJ had it not been for Fergus reviving him. A nearby heavily damaged Allied troop transport, Condor 9, broadcasts a distress call and starts to pitch downwards. Fergus, determined to save them, makes contact with one of the crew, Private Probst Wyatt III, a young soldier with the U.S. 109th Airborne Division. Fergus instructs the panicked Wyatt to take over for the incapacitated pilot and pull up on the wheel as hard as he can to steer the plane upwards. With Condor 9 stabilized, Fergus and BJ decide to abandon their own badly damaged plane by pulling some serious Tom Cruise stunt moves and matrix jumping to Condor 9's outer wing. No big deal.
What's the score, Cat?
Do or die, son. Same as always.
Hoorah, sir!
Heading to the cockpit, BJ finds a hysterical Wyatt and has to double slap him to calm him down. With heavy casualties experienced so far, Fergus gets on the comms to abort the mission, but the request is declined by OSA Command. The mission is of such high importance that the Allies will lose Europe and likely the war if it fails. No sooner than the conversation ends, Condor 9 crash lands on the beachhead of Deathshead's compound. While floating in the water, carnage surrounding him, BJ's inner monologue reveals that the Allies have been losing the war. The Nazi war machine suddenly began advancing at an astonishing rate, and nobody can figure out why. As he comes to on the beachhead, he is attacked by a large mechanized dog of war, the Panzerhound. Lucky for us, this type of technology does not exist.
Oh my God!
He takes cover in the cockpit of a crashed plane and finds out Fergus and Wyatt are in the same predicament, playing a deadly game of cat and mouse with the Panzerhounds hunting them. In addition, a ginormous mech with legs the size of office towers, called the Baltic Eye, aka the Stomper, is sweeping the beachhead and compound, eliminating any resistance encountered. While hiding from this mechanized monstrosity, BJ manages to destroy the heavily armored Panzerhounds using the downed plane's turret. BJ meets up with Fergus and Wyatt, only to be pinned down by machine gun nests in the trenches. Fergus then suggests to BJ that he bum-rush the entrenchments by running as fast as he bloody can straight up the middle, while they, quote, cover him. Why exactly is BJ listening to this guy again? Who is this guy? Okay, well, here goes. I can't actually believe that worked. BJ manages to get into the base through a hole in the floor and makes his way through the twisting trenches and underbelly of the compound. BJ makes it to the machine gun nest, assassinating the crew, and proceeds through the base, which looks like a large industrial mine reminiscent of the large atmosphere processor on LV-426 in the movie Aliens. Encountering heavy resistance, BJ resorts to several tactics ranging from stealth kills to full-out double-wielding machine guns to dispatch scores of Nazis and disable the flak guns on the cliffside that were causing problems for the Allied fleet. He rendezvous with Fergus, Wyatt, and the remaining resistance at the base of the massive tower that comprises the central compound. Wyatt is noticeably distressed, and BJ works on some breathing exercises with him to calm his nerves.
It's just nerves. Let me teach you a trick. Inhale. Count to 4. Exhale. Count to 4. All there is to it.
This breathing exercise is a running theme in the game and shows up several times throughout. While Fergus and company cover from the outside, this guy, is always covering. The plan is for BJ and a small team to
use grapple guns to scale up the massive sidewall tower, get inside, locate the control room, open up the big front door, get inside, work their way to the top floors, find Deathshead,
and shoot him in the head. This is actually a really cool sequence in the game, almost as cool as those old Batman sequences. As they scale their way up the outer wall, a downed transport plane plows right into the building's side, nearly causing the team to fall. When they make it to the top, BJ is the only team member to survive the ascension and reach the control room and open the gates. The inside of the tower is very reminiscent of the original Wolfenstein game, looking like a dark castle's hallways. BJ meets up with Fergus and Wyatt in a Colosseum-like courtyard, and after an intense firefight with security forces, they attempt to cross through the troop transport wreckage, which requires them to jump across a giant chasm to the other side. One by one, they jump over, but as BJ crosses, the floor becomes unstable, and they crash down through several levels. As they recover, they realize they are in some sort of incinerator room with dissected corpses littering the room. The team isn't looking too well, with a Private Pendergast suffering broken legs in addition to an injured eye. Looking for a way out, Wyatt accidentally triggers the incinerator. The team frantically searches for a way out, and BJ manages to open the exit door and haul the disabled Pendergast, barely getting out, with Fergus almost being set on fire. The compound's inner sanctum is starting to look a lot like a house of traps and horrors from the movie Saw. The team finds they are in a room with what looks to be large pods. Upon investigating, a hulking super soldier bursts up through the pod casing and violently crushes one of the private's skulls. Caught off guard, the team scrambles to recover but manages to defeat the super soldier, which stumbles and explodes successfully. Again trapped, Wyatt hears noises approaching from the other side of a large metal door. The grate on the door slides open, and Sir Ben Kingsley shows his face. Actually, it's General Deathshead, but he does look like Sir Ben Kingsley and Michael Rooker had a baby, and then you punch that baby in the face. Hard. Is it me, or do all bald guys look the same? As Deathshead watches, The walls close in on the team, and just when it seems to be all over, the compression knocks the team unconscious. The team awakes, now stripped, handcuffed, and held down by super soldiers. General Deathshead hovers menacingly above, draped in medical gear, projecting similarities to the real-life Nazi war criminals Josef Mengele, aka the Angel of Death, and Dr. Death, aka the Butcher of Mauthausen. Deathshead appears to recognize BJ from previous encounters and comments on his resilience. He takes a particular interest in Wyatt and Fergus's eyes. Then, going full Sophie's choice, he forces BJ to choose who will be dissected for their eyes and their parts.
Look to the one you would have me dissect.
To avoid having both killed, he painfully and hesitatingly chooses Wyatt to be sacrificed. Wyatt heartbreakingly pleads his confidence that BJ will save him before sickeningly falling under Deathshead's scalpel. Forced to watch, BJ retreats internally, practicing the same breathing exercise he practiced earlier with Wyatt.
Count to 4. Inhale. Count to 4. Exhale.
Having finished his gruesome handiwork, Deathshead turns on the incinerator and leaves them to die anyways. Fergus manages to struggle free, throwing a pipe to BJ, who uses it to disable the lone super soldier guard. They attempt to sabotage the incinerator by smashing nozzles, but to no avail. Racing against time as the room heats up, Fergus smashes BJ's handcuffs off, who then manages to hotwire the window bars open. Fergus picks up Pendergast, and the three of them jump from the tower just as the room explodes into a fiery ball of flame. The force of the blast rockets a random piece of shrapnel right into the back of BJ's head. As the chapter ends, an unconscious and potentially mortally wounded Blazkowicz plummets to the waters below. The second chapter of our story opens with BJ floating unconscious and adrift in the ocean. After being discovered by fishermen and transferred to a hospital, we find out the shrapnel in his head cannot be removed for fears of making things worse. With BJ in a vegetative state, with no identification and no one to claim him, they transfer him to a psychiatric asylum in Poland, where he is tended to by head nurse Anya Olawa and her parents. One day, as Anya wheels BJ near a window to get some light, he begins to respond, amazing Anya. With BJ staring blankly into the distance, a time-lapse passes with what looks to be a considerable amount of time. During this time, BJ slowly recovers while figuring out where he is and what's going on. We also see a group of Deathshead commandos led by SS Sturmbannführer Friedrich Keller constantly extracting patients, whom they refer to as subhuman, assumingly to feed more of Deathshead's experiments. One day, soldiers barge in to shut down the asylum under order from Officer Keller. Although not instructed to purge the staff, one of the soldiers heartlessly shoots a patient in their bed, leading to a confrontation that sees Anya pistol-whipped and her parents murdered. Anya is hauled off as the purge continues. However, as the soldier moves in for the kill, that old Nazi-killing muscle memory kicks in, and BJ miraculously smacks the pistol away and sinks a knife deep into his assailant's throat. The adrenaline quickly wears off and BJ falls over, barely able to walk or hold a weapon, as he hasn't moved in years. Still, he seems to be doing pretty good. No crutches necessary. He cautiously sets out to find Anya, navigating his way through the halls of the asylum, which we see is in disarray with fire set throughout and a massacre of patients with blood splattered on the walls. With his vision blurred, legs like jelly, and the mother of all headaches, he descends floor by floor, preferring silent takedowns rather than inviting a bullet dance party by going loud. Unfortunately, just as he releases the lock on the front door, one of the bodies is discovered by the Nazis, and you guessed it, full-on double-wielding machine gun time. As he bursts through the front door, he sees a mass of troops, drones, and armored transports, all occupying vantage points surrounding the entrance. Seemingly fully recovered from his previous injuries, he goes full-on Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and charges the opposition. But instead of them killing him,
he kills them.
BJ finds Anya unconscious near this absolutely badass looking car. Besides being quite fashion forward, these Nazis sure know how to travel in style. He gently places her in the cab, cranks the car to life, and proceeds to drive off wearily. He dozes off for a bit, but is awakened to gunfire as he rams head-on into a soldier. Wholly distracted driving! The soldier rolls into the car and is dispatched by another knife to the neck. BJ introduces himself to Anya, who is still amazed by his recovery and ability to fight. The chapter ends as they drive off into the unknown. The chapter begins with BJ and Anya pulling up to their grandparents' quaint country farmhouse. As Anya greets them, BJ notices a sound coming from the car's trunk, which turns out to be a stowaway Captain Keller. He swiftly blocks the captain's ambush with a crowbar, knocks him out with a vicious left hook, and drags him into the house. Inside, Anya reveals the year is now 1960 to an understandably bewildered BJ, meaning that Blazkowicz was at the asylum for the better part of 14 years. Stunned upon hearing this news, BJ wants to contact the US military and let them know that he's ready for duty. Unfortunately, he is also informed that the war is long over, with the Nazis victorious after they devastated the US with atomic bombs roughly 12 years ago. Speechless, BJ silently gets up from the table and descends to the basement where Captain Keller is being bound and held. A furious Captain Keller feigns a magnanimous offer of leniency if released. This offer and subsequent threats are met with silence as BJ slowly and methodically dons a rubber smock, goggles, and a scene straight out of Hostel picks up a massive chainsaw. After first denying the existence of any resistance under extreme duress, Keller reveals the resistance members would be held at Eisenwald prison in Berlin before falling victim to the saw.
Jokers to the right, here I am, stuck in the middle with you.
Anya's grandfather tells BJ to take care of Anya, and they pray for safe passage on their mission to infiltrate Eisenwald prison. On their journey, BJ and Anya are discovered at a security checkpoint under the truck's false floor, but Gramps quickly dispatches the guard with a shotgun blast to the head. He then calmly asks BJ to kill everyone and clear the road. BJ, you better make sure you take good care of Anya. Under cover of the evening and an incoming storm, BJ silently stalks the trenches and catwalks of the roadside checkpoints, ensuring to stay out of the spotlights and taking out checkpoint guards like he's a member of the Splinter Cell. After clearing the area and raising the gate, BJ makes his way back to the truck. Hey, watch where you point that thing, Nana! Several tankers open up before they can get away, revealing giant mechanized assault robots, or Schwerherr Roboter. These distant cousins of Ed 209 would give MechWarrior a run for their money. BJ uses everything at his disposal, from grenades to ripping off a heavy turret and going full-on Predator styles.
I ain't got time to bleed.
Damn. After sending Mecha D and Mecha Dumb to Robot Heaven, BJ gets back into the trunk to snuggle with Anya, and they proceed to their destination, a night train to Berlin. The scene resumes aboard the Eisenwald, or the Iron Arrow passenger train, with BJ fumbling to make a couple of cups of coffee. As he places the coffee on a tray, the silence of the empty dining cart is disturbed by the entrance of a German officer and her entourage. BJ tries to avoid eye contact, but is waylaid as he tries to pass. It is here we are introduced to one of the most deliciously evil villains in recent gaming history, SS Obersturmbannführer, or Lieutenant Colonel Irene Engel. BJ is stopped by Frau Engel and her young lover Hans Winkel, or Bubi as she affectionately calls him. She forcefully secures his wrist and admires his Aryan features. Casually motioning a golden Luger, she insists that BJ participate in a racial purity test. Her demeanor is terrifying as she casually switches between jocular and menacing tones, while Booby sits by, calmly smoking his cigarette. She goadingly places the Luger in front of BJ, but warns that should he try for the gun or fail the test, he will be shot. She then proceeds to have BJ choose between a set of images on cards, things that excite him, make him happy, and disgust him. You can really feel the tension in the scene, similar to the basement bar scene from the movie Inglourious Bastards. After picking the final card, she pulls the gun on BJ before revealing that she was just toying with him, and the photos were nothing more than old war photos. She boasts that she doesn't require a test and can spot impure blood with her naked eye. This is actually ironic, since it is revealed in future games that BJ is an American, but of Polish and Jewish descent. BJ is allowed to leave and heads back to his cabin where Anya awaits. They share some intimate moments, and they take the opportunity to ride each other to the end of the line. When they awake, BJ plans to infiltrate Eisenwald prison by sneaking through a hotel on the same street as the secret police headquarters that shuttled prisoners to Eisenwald prison. He makes his way through the hotel and headquarters via roofs and catwalks and comes across a prisoner transport being loaded up below. That's the ticket. BJ jumps onto the top just before it pulls away, covertly hitching a ride into Eisenwald. Doesn't this place look like if Vegas was run by the Third Reich? Again, taking to the rooftops, he overhears guards mention the resistance fighters are held in Zellenblock B2. BJ sneaks into the compound through a maintenance hatch and climbs his way into the barracks through the men's restroom. He quickly dispatches the guards, as most of them are either asleep or not paying attention. I mean, who actually would expect someone to be breaking into a prison? After riding up a large elevator to cell block B2, he raps on the large metal door. Time to let the monsters out of the cage. Inside, we see the prisoners are getting the man in the iron mask treatment. After getting rid of the guard, BJ uses the laser cutter to cut the chains off the 5 prisoners held captive inside. Woe and behold, the first prisoner to free themselves is none other than our super Scot, Fergus Reed, who reveals that he's been held here for the last 3 months. He is glad to see BJ and slaps him on the shoulder, asking him what he's been up to.
Shooting, stabbing, strangling Nazis.
Before they can continue with the reunion, one of the prisoners is shot in the head, as the guards, now wise to the jailbreak, stack up outside the door. That iron helmet sure would come in handy now, wouldn't it? The prisoners feebly try to block the door with a small table, as BJ climbs up through the overhead vent shaft where he gets the jump on a control room guard, arms himself with a shotgun, and proceeds to ambush the assailants from the back. Unfortunately, but luckily, Fergus is the only one to survive the attack. Some rescue. BJ and Fergus head back to the prison control room and proceed to release all the prisoners. This, of course, turns into a full-on riot, with yelling and gunfire echoing throughout the prison. BJ and Fergus blast their way through the guards and panzerhounds, making their way down several stairwells. Fergus secures a heavy jack, and with BJ laying down suppressing fire, uses the jack to open up the front gate along with several other checkpoint gates. After combating their way through the prison corridors and making it outside, Fergus hotwires a car in the parking lot, and they bust out of there like a Fledermaus out of hole. With the pedal to the metal, they plow over scores of guards as they drive right out of a window and crash. As more troops pour in, the chapter ends with Fergus and BJ escaping through the sewers. The chapter begins with Anya helping BJ and Fergus out of the sewers. Fergus clumsily hotwires another police car, but manages to attract a local column of soldiers' attention and narrowly escape under a hail of bullets. However, they aren't safe anywhere, as they are under the watchful eyes of numerous surveillance cameras on every corner, kind of like today's society. Fergus rigs the car to self-drive, and as they slowly roll behind the misty spray of a large fountain, they jump out while the vehicle appears to continue driving. They dive into the fountain below and open an underwater bulkhead that leads to a series of sewer maintenance tunnels. Hidden in plain sight, smack dab in the center of Berlin, these sewers are the headquarters of the Kreisau Circle, an extensive network of paramilitary fighters and informants set on overthrowing the Nazi regime. This is the Resistance. Knocking on a metal gate, they are greeted with a bear hug from a very large but simple and gentle giant, Max Haas, who is Wolfenstein's version of Hodor.
Hodor. Hodor. Hodor. Run! Hodor. 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 Hodor.
Don't.
Hodor! 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 Hodor!
BJ is introduced to the rest of the motley crew, including Klaus Krautz, a former Nazi Wehrmacht soldier, Tekla, an annoyingly awkward, hyperactive genius obsessed with equations and calculations, and some generic Englishman named Bobby Bram. He also recognizes Carolyn Becker, a former schoolteacher and leader of the Kreisau Circle. She was introduced in 2009's Wolfenstein, and after suffering crushing injuries, is now resigned to a wheelchair.
Caroline, you're alive.
If you call shitting in a bag living, 3 pulverized vertebrae. You?
Head trauma, 4 inches of cast iron shrapnel right in the conch. Still in there.
Severed colon, septic shock, shattered pelvis.
Memory loss, flashbacks, 14 years in a loony bin.
Good to see you, William.
Under Carolyn's beckoning, BJ is tasked with fetch questing information on a Project Whisper somewhere in the headquarters, while Anya gets trained on radio frequencies. To the amazement of Caroline, Anya can actually use a typewriter, and it's revealed that Anya is exceptionally educated, studying a doctorate in archaeology from the University of London at the age of 16, well, before the Blitzkrieg took it all down. Brains and booty? Booyaka! Littered around the headquarters are news clippings further providing insight into the state of the world. Details of the Red Army defeat with Joseph Stalin being driven into hiding, details of a crushing victory in Asia that would see China and Japan as servant states, and details of the tyrannical British monarchy being brought down under the thunderous cheers of legions of Meghan Markle fans. Max, a pacifist who hates violence, hid the Project Whisper information behind the board in his room. Once returned to Caroline, she explains that Project Whisper is a new type of helicopter aircraft weaponized with jet engines, but undetectable by radar. They plan to steal the only 3 working prototypes in existence held at the London Nautica research facility. With these prototypes and BJ's helps, the Kreisau Circle resistance should return to prominence. The chapter opens with Bobby Bram driving BJ through what used to be downtown London. He explains that there used to be unrelenting urban unrest in the streets caused by the British resistance during the August Uprising of 1951. That is, until the Nazis crushed the uprising with the London Monitor, aka the Das Auge von London. This colossal walking oil rig is the repurposed Baltic Eye that was stalking the beachhead in the prologue. After leveling much of downtown, the Nazis erected a monumental building in its place, the London Nautica. It was created for advanced research in aviation and robotics technology, like Area 51. It is one of the most well-guarded buildings in Germania. Bring out them aliens! Billy drops BJ off a short distance from the London Nautica before peeling off at full speed and suiciding 300 kilos of explosives in the trunk, sending large chunks of rock debris everywhere and toppling the Colossus monument adorning the entrance. BJ makes his way through the rubble, intent on opening the hangar doors on the top level, allowing Caroline and a few pilots to steal Project Whisper. Anya crackles through on the intercom and guides BJ through the wreckage and inner structure of the London Nautica. Alarms blaring, BJ encounters the expected heavy resistance inside, including soldiers, panzerhounds, heavy robots, and the juggernauts of the Nazi regime. BJ is led through the Moon Dome, which is a showcase of the Nazis' expansion into space. Spinning in the center is a topographically correct replica of the moon, and on the surface of the moon is a miniature model of the Nazi lunar base. BJ makes his way up the display catwalks to the Pinnacle control room, where he throws a switch revealing a maintenance exit behind one of the display satellites. He uses the access tunnel to access the elevator shafts, and in a moment to even make John McClane proud, he stands on the counterweight and shoots out the elevator brakes, rocketing him up the shaft to the top floor. He drops into a research laboratory filled with ancient artifacts that look highly technological. Marks identify the artifacts are created by the Deathshead. Deathshead?
You should. Dog, Abel, apostrophe, Abel, Tara, space, yoke, item, Charlie, Hal, Uncle Dog.
Which we later find out is an ancient Jewish mystical society of scientists who designed and built inventions centuries ahead of contemporary times. The Nazis have been reverse engineering these discoveries, which is how they so quickly overtook the Allies and won the war. BJ communicates his findings to Caroline and Anya, who start researching the archives to see if they can find anything about the Deathshead. BJ packs up as much as he can, including appropriating a large experimental laser called the Laser Kraftwerk. He uses the Laser Kraftwerk to cut his way back out to the elevator shaft, where he climbs up a few floors and drops into the top floor hangar, where the 3 prototype helicopters are held. Unfortunately, he also has to contend with Nazi troops and several giant robots. BJ uses the usual tactics to deal with this problem, but he finishes them off with heavy turrets mounted inside the choppers.
Right. Nazi's dead. Nazi robot's dead. Broke all your shit. Helicopter secure.
BJ then opens the roof and the team flies in on gliders. As the unit fires up the aircraft, BJ picks up Caroline, who despite not being able to use her legs, also hang-glided. Is it hang-glode? Hang-glided? Hang-loaded? Yeah, hang-loaded. She hang-loaded in. He puts her in the pilot seat because, I guess, the Nazis made this handicap accessible, and they take flight. The chapter ends with the team maneuvering down into the Kreisel Circle hangar, while Caroline recounts becoming paralyzed after being shot by Deathshead bodyguard Hans Gross during the events of Wolfenstein 2009. The chapter opens with Anya describing the dot-issued parchments recovered from the London Nautica. One of the discoveries is a way to create a type of super concrete with near-perfect structure, enabling rapid construction of facilities hard as steel. This explains how the Nazis were able to build cities so quickly. However, Anya notices the concrete appears to be suffering from a strain of mold that causes deterioration over time and severe allergic reactions in some people.
Ain't nobody got time for that!
BJ sets out to look for a sample in the headquarters that contains the mold. He stops in to check on Fergus, who is racked with survivor's guilt. With the death of Private Wyatt weighing on his conscience, he lambasts BJ for making the wrong choice, stating that he was prepared to die gladly in order to preserve Wyatt and Pendergast, who he felt had potential and could carry on the fight in the future. Now, with them gone, all that is left is a couple of old relics, unsure how long they can continue the fight. This weighing heavy on BJ's mind, he crashes on a mattress upstairs, which, in a little bit of an Easter egg, opens up a dream sequence, which is the original Castle Wolfenstein game from 1981. After waking and finding a circular saw in the sewers, he cuts out a sample of moldy Uber concrete found in the hangar. During this time, Carolyn provides a little more backstory into the relationship of Klaus and Max. After years of trying to conceive, Klaus and his wife had a baby during the war, which unfortunately was born with a club foot. He begged the doctor not to report it to the authorities, as Nazi health policies advocated the euthanizing of anyone with physical deformities or disabilities. When the secret police showed up to take the child, Klaus and his wife tried to stop it, resulting in both the wife and the child being executed by gunshot to the head. Blaming himself, Klaus defected from the Nazis. Sometime later, he stumbled across baby Max, who had been abandoned behind a dumpster because of his severe brain injury and deformity. Klaus took him in and raised him as if he was his own son. With the sample returned to Anya, she traces the element causing the mold to an altered limestone that exists only in northern Croatia. Additionally, after cross-referencing an encrypted list of dot-issued members with archived Nazi records, she postulates that a dot-issued member by the name of Set Roth has been tampering with the formula. He was detained in a forced labor camp in Belica, northern Croatia, which just so happens to excavate limestone in the manufacture of Uber concrete. BJ is basically voluntold to infiltrate Camp Belica undercover and find this possibly last living member of the dot-issued. The chapter opens in darkness before the heavy door of a prisoner transport train slides open. BJ has allowed himself to be taken captive to infiltrate the Belica labor camp. This is one of the more solemn chapters due to the reflection of real-world atrocities of the past. Frau Engel is recognized overseeing the induction process as the camp director, her viciousness on full display. As the prisoners are herded towards triage, we heartbreakingly see a prisoner plead with Frau Engel to save his dying baby. She responds by dangling the child by the leg before savagely whipping the man with a baton. The scene cuts to a cattle column of prisoners. Booby, supervising above, shows a hint of recognition before separating BJ from the line, commenting on his sturdiness and potential to be a good worker. BJ is then tattooed with an identification number. Historians state that this is a practice that occurred in actual concentration camps, particularly Auschwitz. IDs were initially sewn into clothes, but due to the massive influx of POWs and increased death rate, it became difficult to identify corpses since clothes were removed from the bodies. Therefore, tattoos were used, first with a special metal stamp composed of needles, and then with a single needle on the left forearm for efficiency. BJ is immediately put to work, directed to a row of cement mixers where he meets a prisoner named Bombate. BJ finds out that Set Roth is indeed alive and in prison block 4. He negotiates a uniform swap with a fellow inmate named Milo, which would allow BJ to get into block 4 and Milo to see his wife being held in block 6. BJ then damages his cement mixer by smashing a small metal gasket into the mixer, resulting in an explosion that shuts down work for the day. The detainees are dispersed, and BJ makes his way through the Block 4 security checkpoint to the dormitory, where Set Roth is tending to an injured resident. At first, Set charmingly mocks the idea of any rescue attempt and refuses to betray the secrets of the Deathshead. But after pleading the case for the resistance, Set weighs sacrificing his honor for righteousness. He proposes an exchange: BJ's help to shut down Camp Belica for Set's help in unlocking the Deathshead's true secrets. Oy vey! Part of this plan is a project Set has been working on, a keypad device that will allow him to take control of the mighty security mech known as Herr Faust, German for Mr. Fist, that is patrolling the courtyard. It's only missing a power source, a Detronic battery, which can be found in the service station back in Block 6. You know, most people would actually be making shivs or chess pieces. Nah, ultra-advanced mech controls. To get to Block 6, the security systems monitoring the exits must be disabled in the guard barracks. BJ attempts this by sneaking into the morgue through a disposal chute and landing in a pile of bodies. Before he can get very far, he is bushwhacked by an officer affectionately known as the Knife. Can you guess why? He has a reputation for randomly dragging prisoners into the barracks, torturing them, and burning them in the kiln. When BJ awakes, the Knife tries his darnest to earn his nickname by unremittingly slashing him with a blade as he chides him. BJ again passes out as a blade is sunk deep into his chest. Assumed dead, he comes to in the primary chamber of the kiln, surrounded by other emaciated bodies. He pulls the knife from his chest, stumbles out of the barbecue, and neck stabs 2 guards. Resuming his mission, he sneaks through the morgue. He finds the Knife and exacts revenge by skewering him in the stomach with the same blade that he left in BJ's chest. No takesies backsies this time! After finding the control room and disabling the security system, BJ makes his way outside, through the security exit, back through the cement mixing area, and through a blue door leading to Block 6. Breaking into the service center through a window at the top of some scaffolding, he stalks his way through the upper floor offices, silently killing all he encounters. I hope these guys had topped up on their neck stab insurance. BJ makes his way down to the basement and locates the Detronic battery connected to a wall. BJ successfully secures the battery, but is electrocuted by the panel in the process. BJ is found by Frau Engel and Booby, who now recognize him from the night train. Surmising he must be an American anarchist, Frau Engel angrily orders the execution of BJ and the entire population of Cell Block 4 as an example to any would-be anarchists. She then knocks BJ out again with a blow from the baton. This guy's been knocked out more times than Conor McGregor. BJ wakes up tied to a post next to Set Roth, with Herr Faust systematically executing prisoners down a line with a bolt through the head like cattle. BJ miraculously still has the battery and tosses it to Set, who manages to use it to activate his device, turning the Nazi automaton against the guards. Frau Engel frustratingly demands the mech obey as it grabs her by the neck. Before it can deal the finishing blow, the guards open fire, causing it to misfire and grotesquely disfiguring Frau Engel's face. She crawls right up to BJ in his face. Ugh, she's a close talker. She threatens to hunt them down like vermin, skin charred, fats rendered, like a tasty ribeye. Her threats are cut short as the mech grabs her and tosses her like a ragdoll into the distance. Set and BJ are freed. BJ manually takes over the mech, raining down destruction as they press their escape. Returning to the camp, they load into several trucks to aid in their departure. As they crank the vehicles to life, Frau Engel astonishingly shows up wielding dual machine guns and killing several companions. They peel out of there at full speed, tires screeching as she continues the barrage. Back at the Berlin headquarters, Set dishes full details about the Deathshead, reiterating they are millennia old and specializing in inventions centuries ahead of what can even be imagined, appearing magical. It was these inventions that were discovered by the Nazis and led to their victory. However, the cache of knowledge that the Nazis found is apparently only a small one out of hundreds held in safekeeps worldwide. The chapter ends with Set offering to open the gates of one of the largest caches, like a great hall stacked high with knowledge and inventions. But one catch, the vault is located at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. To access the undersea vault, Set suggests stealing a Nazi U-boat capable of great depths. Did you know the word U-boat is a short form of the German word Unterseeboot? Underseeboot? Underseeboat? Seems so obvious now. He then gets to work on fixing a portable submarine, or portable Unterseeboot, that the Nazis used for maintenance but has been out of working order for years. Later, during a nap, Tekla creepily sits over BJ and Anya in bed, sipping her tea. She startles BJ awake and waxes poetic about sleep and consciousness while simultaneously talking to herself like Gollum.
Hold on.
She continues to ramble on about pseudo-intellectual mumbo-jumbo like Colonel Sanders from those Matrix sequels that I'd like to pretend never happened. After the conversation takes a negative turn, again thanks to Tekla being annoying, BJ is later seen reconnecting with Tekla in her room, and during a scattered conversation about cause and effect. BJ notices numerous firearms on the floor, to which Tekla states is for taking out as many Nazis as possible when the end comes. In a moment of connection, she asks BJ to teach her how to use these guns. While they wait for Set to finish repairs, BJ spends some time getting to know his new squadmate Bombate, and they share a moment around resilience to the things they have seen and the need to ride it out. The chapter ends with a portable submarine ready for action. Oh yeah, and BJ and Anya are also ready for action.
Nice.
The team makes their way through the sewer tunnels with the tunnel glider, intent on descending deeper into the Berlin Catacombs, which houses the central munition stockpile of the Nazi regime. With Anya providing tactical support over a transponder attached to the sub, BJ sets off alone, seeking access to the weapons depot through a route that will take him under Eisenwald prison. During his journey, BJ recounts to himself several instances of experiences with water as a child, such as when he was 13 and fell into a pond by the stables, and then came up covered in leeches. BJ emerges in a tunnel system just a short elevator ride up to the weapons depot. The second leg of the mission is to hijack an underground cargo train chock full of various weapons and drive it north to an abandoned underground train station where the rest of the team was waiting. The target is a torpedo loadout on board, with the intent of hiding BJ in the torpedo casing, thus allowing BJ to board the U-boat undetected and seize control. BJ proceeds through long stretches of metro tunnels, stations, switching and shunting yards, encountering only minor resistance. With the target ordnance train in sight, BJ is spotted by juggernauts and a firefight ensues. With bullets chasing him and slim chances of survival, BJ makes a mad dash for the train, but just manages to reach the engine controls, pulling away as the enemy assault continues in vain. When he reaches the northern station, the usual suspects are waiting and unload some of the armaments to aid in ground assaults, but careful not to take too many to avoid suspicion. After removing a torpedo payload, BJ climbs in. With the torpedo back in supply, BJ should wake up on the U-boat in time for breakfast, patch into the communication room, and raise the antenna buoy to make radio contact. If any sailors get in the way, bang bang soda pop. BJ indeed wakes up in the torpedo chamber of Eva's hammer, the crown jewel of the Nazi U-boat fleet. He unscrews the torpedo hatch and emerges slowly, careful not to attract the attention of sailors nearby. He hides behind the casing and sees a patrol nearby blocking the entrance of the main body. Opting for a shotgun for close encounters, BJ initially attempts stealth, but the quarters are so tight he is almost immediately discovered, resulting in a shipwide alert. BJ proceeds from the torpedo bay through the torpedo room and into the barracks, with the narrow corridors making it easy to serve out lead salads. He proceeds to make his way through the inner ventilation shafts before dropping down into the bridge. BJ takes to the exterior halls, flanking the juggernauts and prioritizing shotgun blasts to the oxygen tanks on their backs. BJ fires charged shots from the laser craftwork, causing the final opponent to explode in a red mist as he clears the last enemy in the hunt for Reich October. In the small communications room nearby, BJ raises the communication buoys by severing the attached chains and connecting the device he was given to the communications console. With communications established, Fergus immediately begins tracking their position. Sometime later, the upper deck of Eva's hammer cracks open with the sunlight spilling in. As Fergus maneuvers in for a landing, he reveals that the sub is armed with a nuclear cannon. U-boat captains were required to memorize the launch codes, and unfortunately those secrets were taken to the grave during the recent assault. The team can next be seen descending in deep water scuba suits towards the Dot Yeshud vault. Fergus reveals that there are actual physical nuclear decryption keys they can obtain, but they're not held on Earth. They are kept on, wait for it, the lunar base. That's right, folks, the dang moon. Nazis on the moon. Space Nazis. It's where they do all their top secret research. As seriously as this game takes itself, it's starting to look like BJ could moonlight as the international man of mystery. Where aren't there Nazis? The ocean floor, the moon, Charlottesville, Virginia, Capitol Hill. The team reaches the ocean floor and the entrance of the Deathshead vault. Set cheerfully triggers a large tubular entry and step into a see-through tube straight out of SeaWorld. It looks like the Deathshead must have also invented transparent aluminum.
Admiral, there be whales here.
Proceeding further into the premises and through a decompression airlock, they come out to a large chamber with a golden structure in the middle of the room. This is a lift to the secret vault. Fancy schmancy! At first, the entry controls do not work, likely since they've been sitting idle for centuries, so they manually charge the magnetic coils responsible for activating the stairs and the elevation platform, and ride it up to the vault. As the trio explores the wonders of the vault, Caroline and Anya inform them of a lead on the nuclear decryption keys. Deathshead's chief research scientist is expected to be leaving for the Nazi lunar base to oversee the launch of the latest generation of super soldier program. He is scheduled to be on board a troop transport train incoming from the African front. They plan to intercept the train as it crosses the Gibraltar Bridge, steal his identity, and take his place aboard the shuttle to the moon. Once on the moon, locate the decryption keys, bring them back to Earth. Easy peasy. Set intends to employ one of the inventions, a giant ornate floating brass sphere called the Spindly Torque, to aid in this heist, stating that it will stop anything it's placed in front of. Fergus also finds a collapsible armadillo-like suit of armor reminiscent of something out of Iron Man or Dead Space. It has a Neuralink interface that allows the wearer superhuman strength, agility, and durability. With a plan in place and the weapons to execute, the next stop is the Strait of Gibraltar. The chapter opens with the team approaching the Gibraltar Bridge aboard the helicopter craft. The Gibraltar Bridge is a megastructural suspension bridge stretching across the Strait of Gibraltar from mainland Europe to Africa. It serves as a means of transporting troops and various supplies to fuel the Nazi war machine in its campaigns on the African front. As the high-speed train barrels toward them, BJ activates the Spindly Torque, which momentarily floats above the bridge. Suddenly, harpoons shoot out from all over the ball, with a series of long cables penetrating and deeply embedding themselves into all corners of the bridge. The device then rapidly twists in on itself, retracting its cables, causing a large section of the bridge to collapse in on itself and derailing the train in the process. Mayhem and destruction are just par for the course. One of its cars marked London Nautica and containing the chief research scientist is dangling precariously over the edge like, as Fergus puts it, a bungled up horse head on a broken neck. Fergus pulls up and drops BJ off on a catwalk alongside the bridge's main support structures. BJ makes his way through the twisting wreckage of the train and the remains of the bridge, along outer sections hovering precariously over the watery depth below. BJ heads toward the direction of the Spindly Torque, dispatching any remaining surviving opposition. The large expanse of the bridge makes it especially difficult for BJ as snipers hide around distant corners and super soldiers take up positions on more solid ground near the bottom. At one point, BJ tries to navigate a significant gap in the bridge, but nearly falls. He is seized and pummeled by a super soldier. With things looking grim for our hero, Fergus suddenly ascends behind the super soldier, surprising it and decapitating it with one of the rotors. Tumbling to the landing below, BJ dusts himself off and boards the helicopter. They circle over the top of the bridge, pulling up very close to the target cart, where BJ uses the heavy cannon on board to quash the remaining resistance. BJ finds the corpse of the chief scientist near the base of the wreckage. The chapter ends with BJ donning the disguise, packing his equipment in cargo, and boarding the space shuttle, looking mighty fine in those threads.
What are those?
Well, if you didn't think the ocean floor technology vault and the anti-gravity spiky octopus ball was futuristic enough, well, here it is, folks. The Moonbasis 1, aka Moonbase 1. An ever-evolving complex populated by military personnel, miners, industrial workers, and scientists, the lunar base serves as the first and foremost research center for the Third Reich. The chapter begins with Deathshead, who is also the Minister of Advanced Research, congratulating BJ over the intercom on his promotion to Chief Research Scientist and welcoming him to the base. BJ proceeds through Moonport security and sneaks through the luggage conveyor to the baggage claim area. Who hasn't wanted to do that? He finds his luggage and inexplicably changes back into his old clothes, rather than keeping on the disguise that would allow him to just casually stroll to the objective.
Let's go.
Hold it right there, mister. Did you really think you could get away with this?
I did, actually, yes.
He also unpacks his big-ass guns that nobody had bothered to scan. So the nuclear decryption keys are in the command module, but apparently the only way to get there is on foot over the moon's surface. That's pretty game logic-y and doesn't really make a whole lot of sense because I'm sure there's got to be another way. Just a leisurely stroll.
Nice night for a walk, eh? Nice night for a walk.
After attempting to sneak back through the luggage conveyor, as per usual, a fierce firefight breaks out in a large circular observatory. In the end, BJ manages to finish the full-on frontal assault and pump his weapon all over the moonfolk.
The end! Bam!
The atmosphere throughout the section is actually very intense and does give a sense of being on a space station. BJ finds a service tunnel and moves through the brooding, restrictive infrastructure, dropping down into the laboratory walkways and into the airlock, where he happens to find a spacesuit. Opening the airlock, BJ emerges into the noiseless vacuum of space. This section is actually really cool, but is quite short, and I wish they had actually done more with this concept. Avoiding armed drones patrolling the perimeter, he takes some giant leaps for mankind to the massive outer doors of the command module. Without any opposition, he removes his spacesuit and proceeds to search for the nuclear decryption keys. After a long elevator ride up, BJ emerges inside a dome-like structure that looks vaguely similar to the moon dome in the London Nautica. Near the top of the dome, BJ crosses through a set of blast doors across a catwalk and ends up in the war room, identified by the characteristic jumbo round table surrounded by chairs. Reaching his objective, BJ interacts with the encryption terminal nearby and starts printing out the nuclear decryption keys. With the keys in hand, BJ now needs to secure a way back to Earth. Unfortunately, what was a relatively uneventful mission thus far becomes much more frantic as a Class Alpha security alert echoes throughout the base. With patrols on the lookout, BJ again takes to the ventilation systems and uses the laser craftwork to cut out ad hoc escape routes. Security forces up the ante by prepping to evacuate all breathable oxygen in the base just to flush BJ out. BJ backtracks through the security checkpoints to the shuttle bay at a hurried pace, hoping to hijack a ride home. Luckily, a transport shuttle belonging to the new Super Soldier program is prepping to take off for delivery. Unluckily, the delivery is for 2 super soldiers, which suddenly come to life and attack. Dodging around and careful not to damage his only means of escape, BJ incapacitates the super soldiers and boards the shuttle moments before the base's oxygen was set to be evacuated. The pilot aboard, unaware that BJ has stowed away, plots a course for the London Nautica, before suddenly getting a knife in the back. As the shuttle barrels towards Earth, the London Nautica, aware of this hijacking, opens fire. BJ is unable to maintain his heading under the barrage. The shuttle activates emergency protocols, and BJ braces for impact as it crashes down on the top deck of the London Nautica. BJ awakes in a daze, still alive it seems, but under heavy fire from the forces collected outside. The shuttle is rocked by a massive explosion and teeters over the edge of the top deck. As it starts to pitch over the edge to the river below, BJ force runs out the shuttle's back and clutches a loose cable attached to the infrastructure. The cable snaps, swinging downwards. The force of the wind whizzes by as BJ slams hard into the side of the structure, through a window and splattering a Nazi officer in the way. Holy schnitzel! Brushing off any semblance of pain, BJ immediately encounters enemies. Fergus informs BJ that the London Monitor is back in service before being pinned down in a firefight himself. BJ takes to the outside of the building, showing off his parkour skills, and recommits to surviving so he can see Anya again. In what is essentially a large die-hard shooting gallery, BJ descends floor by floor through construction areas and offices, and occasionally the outer scaffolding. As BJ reaches the ground floor, the hulking London Monitor can be seen breaching the horizon, warning the citizens of London to return to their homes and directly commanding BJ to surrender. The London Monitor charges up a massive cannon in the center eye and unleashes a devastating blast. BJ makes a mad dash for exposed piping in the ground to escape the onslaught. Like a tunnel rat, BJ moves from area to area, evading the gaze of the London monitor. Wave after wave of missiles pummels the ground above. This thing is armed to the teeth, or should I say toes, since even its cankles have miniguns on them. BJ becomes aware of a pattern in the attacks whereby the missile bays open up before each barrage, momentarily exposing an unarmored weak spot. He proceeds to play cat and mouse with quick hits from the laser craftwork, capitalizing on this vulnerability and destroying each missile bay. With help from observations from Fergus, BJ notices that when the red eye is charging, the engine bay below opens up momentarily, with a window for BJ to hit the engine when it's exposed. BJ manages to capitalize on this pattern as well and runs directly below the London monitor, delivering it a serious case of explosive diarrhea. The London monitor can be seen reeling from the damage, liquid pouring from the engine bay as it topples over it and pitches into the London Nautica. The chapter closes with a flashback in which BJ recounts the confrontation in the incinerator room during the prologue. First comparing the similarity of their names, Wilhelm, William, Deathshead then launches into his own Heisenberg moment.
But you call me Deathshead. I don't like it. I'm a happy man. You see? It doesn't sound right in English. Say it correctly.
The chapter opens with Klaus picking up an unconscious BJ near the wreckage of the London monitor. Frau Engel has finally discovered the location of the resistance base, with Deathshead's men storming it, and things are getting worse by the minute. Caroline and Fergus successfully hide in the helicopter hangar, while others are killed. Anya and others are discovered in a secret hiding spot behind a poster and are taken captive at Deathshead's fortress. Klaus and BJ make a grand entrance by launching their vehicle off of a bridge into a group of soldiers on the outskirts and base of the water fountain. Klaus is shot in the chest, and just before BJ is subjected to the same, Max surprises the assailant and plays his head like a drum before taking a few bullets himself. Unfazed, Max pulls Klaus from the vehicle and the three of them escape into the sewers. With the hideout ablaze, among smoke-filled corridors, BJ runs into Tekla, who holds herself up in her room. Still concentrating on the maths, she calculates the ratio of Nazi soldiers that they each need to kill in order to be victorious. She made good progress towards this ratio, utilizing the training she received from BJ earlier. BJ pleads with her to escape with him, but she denies this, saying that she must stick with her model, making this her final day, and thanking him for his friendship. She cocks her Luger and slides the window shut just as Nazis storm in. She kills two more, exceeding her quota, but succumbing to the gunfire. BJ heads towards the hangar bay, but accidentally slides right to the foot of two juggernauts. Suddenly, a figure leaps from the background and demolishes the two robots in a fantastic display of acrobatics. It turns out to be Caroline, as the Dot-Yeshud power suit has given her legs back. These boots are made for ass-kicking. Caroline bolts off and returns with the helicopters to evacuate the last survivors. With Klaus mortally wounded, he tells Max to see the strength inside him before an emotional goodbye. The chapter ends with the helicopter returning to the U-boat as the team prepares for the endgame. The final chapter comes full circle with the idyllic backyard barbecue dream playing out again in BJ's mind. But this time, Anya is with him and joins him on the lawn chair. As she lays her head to his shoulder, BJ is reminded of what he is fighting for. With the nuclear decryption keys in hand, the final plan is straightforward. Pulverize the outer fortress wall with a large forward cannon and get BJ inside. Then rescue the prisoners who should be held on the lower levels, exfil the chopper and nuke the site. Bimmo Benno, no more Deathshead. In an impressive scene, the Unterseeboot surfaces and with a mighty blast launches the spindly torque, which does its thing, leaving a gaping hole in the compound's outer wall. BJ dives into the canal and enters through a damaged sewer grate. As BJ emerges from the rubble of the entrance, he discovers the compound is, of course, heavily fortified. Deathshead, aware of BJ's presence, taunts him over the intercom as the battle rages on. He boasts of his achievements, making himself out to be a savior, amongst other megalomaniacal traits. The fight is difficult and the journey has been long. The guns weigh heavy as BJ fights his way into the experimentation labs. The sterile green glow of the stainless steel highlights the formaldehyde-filled preservation containers full of body parts. As BJ attempts to climb into the ventilation, Frau Engel's boy toy, Booby, ambushes him and injects him with synthetic titanospasmin, a neurotoxin that causes paralysis. Ain't no drugs gonna keep a good man down, as BJ groggily awakens to Booby FaceTiming Frau Engel. Boasting his catch, Booby drags BJ in front of the camera with a large metal hook and tortures BJ with a knife, much to Frau Engel's pleasure. Even though BJ was injected with enough tranquilizer to paralyze an elephant, he still manages to recover and take a bite out of the flabbergasted Booby's neck. Guess you didn't realize this guy was playing on God mode, eh, Booby? BJ pulls the knife from his chest and gives Booby the long rest right in front of Frau Engel. Dang, she looks like she's gonna need a spa day soon. Moving on and hot-wiring an elevator, he coincidentally runs into Anya and a group of prisoners already in mid-escape, and then conveniently gets separated from them as the escape elevator jams between floors. BJ psychs himself up as the elevator rockets towards the tower's pinnacle and the final showdown with Deathshead. BJ comes out guns blazing at the top, but is thwarted by a thick blast shield. From his safety position, Deathshead makes it clear that he hasn't forgotten him or about what happened here 14 years ago. Sorting through a vast collection of specimens, he retrieves one very specific. Cut to a flashback of what happened during that fateful day 14 years ago. We see, in gruesome detail, Wyatt's vivisection and the removal of his brain. It is this brain that Deathshead now inserts into a prototype robotic shell. Deathshead marvels as it comes to life, the amalgamation of the human brain with the efficiency and obedience of a machine. Wyatt stands tall, dwarfing the stature of even Blazkowicz. It grabs BJ's weapon and with a swift punch, rockets him out the door and into the rain. With the storm raging overhead, BJ runs to take cover. While dodging attacks, he uses his knife to open up several nearby crates, revealing Tesla grenades that he uses to shock and disorient Wyatt's systems. After finally disabling Wyatt's mechanized shell, BJ pulls the brain tube out from the casing. Sitting in the rain with the hulking machine, Wyatt apologizes to BJ for attacking him, as he was unable to control his actions. He asks for his suffering to end, to which BJ tearfully obliges and releases him from his torment.
Private, it was an honor to serve by your side.
Without a moment to rest, Deathshead emerges outfitted in another large mech. This place is like a Warhammer fan's wet dream. The first shots ricochet off Wyatt's lifeless husk, serving as temporary cover to a still shell-shocked BJ. With the final battle upon him, BJ is first unable to damage the mech, but when Deathshead boasts that the storm itself powers his invulnerability, BJ notices two large zeppelins floating nearby, channeling lightning energy to a giant rooftop transmitter. BJ uses the rooftop flak cannons to destroy these zeppelins, causing lightning bolts to strike Deathshead and overloading his shield. In a flash of light, an explosion causes the mech to fall through the roof. Ooh, you could say that he did not see that coming. Climbing down the hole to finish the fight, BJ launches everything he has as the surroundings burn to the ground. Deathshead mech finally falls forward defeated. As BJ rips off the roll cage, a final flashback plays, perhaps serving to partially justify the actions to come next, and partially as absolution for the impossible decision BJ was forced to make. BJ hauls Deathshead from the wreckage. A still defiant Deathshead continues to taunt BJ before being stabbed multiple times. However, Deathshead had wanted this reaction. Having accepted his fate, he has one final trick up his sleeve.
So colorful!
The final scene pans over the carnage as BJ drags himself towards an opening in the wall. Over the comms, Fergus informs him that the nuclear cannons have been armed and is just waiting for an all-clear to fire. Through the opening, BJ can see the team below reaching the evac site, with Anya looking longingly for any sign of BJ. Seeing none, she reluctantly backs towards the helicopter, and it clears the blast zone, receding into the night. Knowing that his injuries are likely fatal, BJ painfully rolls over, closes his eyes, and gives the all-clear to fire.
I'm a clear to fire. You're clear.
Well, this is where the game ends and the story leaves off. Is this noble sacrifice the end of our hero? Not until the grosses go down. Here's a little hint. If you wait to the end of the credits scene, you can hear the sound of a helicopter fading in. Is this the crew rescuing BJ? Maybe. Where do we go from here? The story picks up in 2019 with the release of Wolfenstein: The New Colossus. Frau Engel, having survived the events of this game, becomes the game's main antagonist. There's definitely some crazy stuff that goes down in that game. And I mean crazy. But that's for another Gamesplain. Thanks for sticking around. I know it's a long one, but before we go, here are 3 interesting facts about the game that are lesser known. If you haven't figured it out by now, BJ Blazkowicz, which is what he's referred to in most of the games, is short for William Joseph Blazkowicz. Billy being short for William, and he's actually also known by the nickname Terror Billy by the Nazis. And who can really blame them, since he literally kills thousands of them and launches a nuke against their base. Can't have history without the Americans launching some nukes. Like the Marvel Cinematic Universe or the MCU, there is kind of an id-u or id-universe where characters and interactions have histories that span across game franchises. According to id Software's co-founders, the legendary John Romero and Tom Hall, the character that you play in that game Doom, or the Doom guy, is named Sergeant Stan Blazkowicz, which means that he's actually the great-grandson of BJ Blazkowicz. Further to the id universe, the tattoo that we see BJ get on his way to Camp Belica is actually the numerical representation of the word Doom, further tying together this universe. Alright, Wolfenstein: The New Order, have you played it? What did you think? What was your favorite part? Whatever you thought, leave a comment below to let me know. And as always, if you like what you see, go ahead and click below to get Gamesplained. The preceding program contains scenes of extreme violence, sexual references, and maybe some coarse language. I can't really remember now, and should not have been viewed by young children. We did warn you, but kind of in jest, but kind of not. It may have been our fault, but mainly yours. Next time, do your research before deciding if you want to believe this warning.